This is the perfect family scene when Mom, Dad, and Junior all want to hear the same radio program.
It's important, actually. The interviewer does homework and gets going instead of kind of dulled, you know.
You probably get the best interview, darling.
I have a personal relationship with my fans where I don't mess around.
You know what I mean? You're right, you know, music should be a fucking uplifting thing.
I delivered the message. Now.
It's time for Ben Pitcher's Industry Insider.
Got the message?
Victoria joining me here from Alpha Entertainment on Ben Pitcher's Industry Insider. Vix, it's been a while. How are you?
I'm well. It has been a while. It's been way too long since we chatted.
It has been. We've never really had a chat in this capacity, but I'm glad that you're joining me on the show. It's great to have you on board, mate. Now, I just want to let everyone out there know a little bit more about what we're going to chat about this evening. Alpha Entertainment, you've got an independent PR company now, and you're specialising in PR, marketing, strategic consulting service it is as well. But, I mean, you started, I wouldn't say at the bottom, but like most of us in the entertainment biz, we took our first gig where we could get it.
I started right at the bottom. Best place to start, because that way you learn.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about, you started at Triple M was the first one. I started at a radio gig myself, so it looks like most of us started a radio gig.
I didn't know you did the radio. When did you start out in radio?
I started at 40 in Townsville, Northern Queensland, in Australia, for people outside of Australia listening. Yeah, cooking sausages and wearing promo T-shirts.
Oh, wow. I know 40 in Townsville because obviously I was, raised in Queensland, so I'm familiar with that station. But yes, I started at Triple M. It was my first job out of university, and it was in their sales department. And, oh, God, I hated it. I absolutely loathed it. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I learned about everything I never wanted to be as a boss. But also, working within Triple M, there was a moment where a girl walked into the radio station with a band, and I knew in that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do with the rest of my life. So something really amazing came out of that.
That was the moment, was it? That was the moment that changed you from, I really hate this, but I'm going to stick to it.
No, it actually drove me to get out of there, which was really good. It's so funny because, I really didn't know where I would end up when I left school or what I really wanted to do. And I remember that day so clearly, so crystal clearly. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And then I started to hunt out what I needed to do, to get myself into a record company.
Okay.
And I left Triple M shortly after that, and I got a job in street press. And I did that because, through the research and talking to people that I knew, I found out that the best way to get a job in a record company is to be around the promo reps that were coming in. So the promo reps were in every week from every label to the street press office. So I became friends with them, and that's how I found out about my first, record company job. And I found out about it and applied and ended up getting the job.
Now, let's backtrack a little bit before we talk about getting into EMI and Virgin. That would have been a very interesting move from radio. Was it like jumping into the deep end for you, going into press?
It was actually very different. It was a lot more relaxed. It was street press. It was a far better environment. Triple M, that is, you're selling air. It's a particular kind of person that you're dealing with. And it really wasn't the kind of environment that I was ever going to blossom in. So when I moved into street press, whilst I took across the sales skills that I'd learned, it was I felt healthier environment for myself. And it was a complete culture change. I'd gone from, being told to wear suits, stilettos and stockings every day into, thank God, I can wear a pair of jeans to work.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice change. It's a nice change, isn't it?
It was a very welcome change, let me tell you.
Now, EMI Virgin, how did that position come about? That really is the jump from what I can see here into where you are now, or the start of the journey.
And look, everyone around me thought I was absolutely crazy. It was a 3-day-a-week job. It was reception, and it was taking phone orders over the phone and entering them into the system, so data order entry. And I wanted that job so desperately because I wanted that foot in the door, and I took it. And my parents and my friends were like, oh, my God, how are you going to survive? What are you doing? All the rest of it. But I put my head down. First of all, receptionist is one of the best jobs you can ever have because you learn everything you need to know. You take every call that comes into the building. You greet every person that arrives in the building. So it's actually, in some ways maybe an undervalued job. I learned a lot in that 6 months. I met a lot of people, and I worked hard, and 3 days a week ended up becoming more. And I think it was in about 5 months, the promotions backtracking, during that 6 months, I really tried to make myself invaluable to the promotions team. Mm-hmm. I always tried to sort of get involved and help out. And the promotions coordinator at that time fell pregnant and went on maternity leave. So I was moved immediately into that role. So I got lucky in some ways, I think.
Subscribe to Ben Pitcher's Industry Insider on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and iTunes. Follow Ben on Facebook at Industry Insider Official.
The taking orders over the phone, that's something that probably doesn't happen at actually, I'm sure it doesn't happen at a record label anymore. Can you can you explain to the newer generation that probably are unfamiliar with hard copy sales exactly what you meant by that?
Yeah, of course. I forget, it is such a long time ago, but, obviously there were a lot of retail stores in those days. And, this is not going back that long. It's only like 20 years or so. But a store would ring up EMI, for example, and they would want to order, let's say, 50 records from the EMI catalogue. So they would give me their store number and I would put that into our system. Mm-hmm. And then they would read off catalogue numbers because every album had a catalogue number. So I'd plug the catalogue number into the system. The album would come up, I'd put the quantity in, allocate it to the store. And essentially that order then is shipped immediately to the warehouse. The warehouse receive the order, pick the stock from the shelves, pack the stock and ship it out to the stores. That's how it used to happen.
Wow.
I know. And then, it would arrive in stores and, around Christmas time especially, we used to go in and help the stores unpack the stock to make sure your stock was being racked in a store.
It's so very steam powered, isn't it?
That's exactly it. I hadn't thought about those days until you asked me that question. That's quite funny.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things have changed, even in the the radio business as far as how operations happen. But yeah, that's part of the story. That's part of the history of it, I guess, and not so tangible anymore. I don't think.
Exciting. Yeah, no.
Not so tangible.
But the changes are so exciting though. Like I actually do think. I don't think the music industry is all doom and gloom at all. I think, I'm very excited about the changes that are happening, the different ways people can access music. And, I wasn't sure how I would feel about it, the digital age, because I still, I love vinyl and I go and buy vinyl and I still like physical copies. I'll probably always be that way. But, the digital era has brought some incredibly exciting opportunities to the industry. Yeah. I think that the industry is still trying to cope with, as they probably should have embraced the digital age 10 years before they ever did. Yeah. And I think that's probably to their own detriment, that, the systems and the policies and the accounting are 10 years behind where they should be.
Yeah. Well,
I'll probably get in trouble for saying that.
Well, hey, that's all right. Hey, listen, let's have a quick break, and we'll move from EMI Virgin and climbing up the ladder there into making the big move, which was over to the UK and eventually finding a job with Island Records. That's amazing. We'll have a chat about that next, shall we?
Okay, great.
Follow Ben on Twitter at Official Insider. You're listening to Ben Pitcher's Industry Insider.
Vic's joining me here from Alpha Entertainment on Ben Pitcher's Industry Insider. Now, Vic, we just had an initial introduction to your career, and as with everybody starting at the bottom, as you decided to it was the bottom, you were saying, in radio, and then working your way through street press and into eventually a record label job as receptionist, and moving your way up there. Now, before you left EMI, what was the last job you had there before making the big move?
I worked as a promotions manager in Brisbane, so that dealt with, and so I would, and I was promotions manager still with EMI and Virgin, and I would take records into radio that were priorities and plug the record and try and secure airplay. And I would service our music to all the press. And online wasn't part of it at that point. So it was your TV stations, your press station, your press outlets, and radio stations. They were, your media contacts. And we also did a lot in those days we did club promos. We dealt with DJs. We did a lot more remixes. So it was very hands-on in that. But it was a great job. I loved that.
What was your favourite part of that job? Now looking back at it, that things are a lot more digital. Just what you miss from the tangible side of working at a record label and working in music and doing those face-to-face things.
You get especially when you know there's a great record on the horizon. And there is something, I always found there was something lovely about when your stock would arrive, your promo stock to take out to media. And opening that box of stock and, it might be, the new Lenny Kravitz album, or it was the Blur record, or it was a Depeche Mode record. And, it was really exciting. You'd be waiting for the album to arrive. You might get to hear it if they sent an advance watermark copy out, or somebody from the company overseas might come out with the record and play it to the company. But I loved getting boxes of stock, and you'd unpack your stock. And and still to this day, I think it's very valuable face-to-face meetings with your media. Mm-hmm. I had in those days what was called a call cycle. So I saw, let's say, street press, like Time Off or Rave magazine in Brisbane or Scene magazine, like every Wednesday at the same time. And that face-to-face contact is invaluable. It's the relationships that you build. And I'm lucky to have come through and been trained in an era where face-to-face contact was really important, because that's how you build the relationships that last, the entirety of your career. Now, I might not have to see media on such a regular basis anymore, but, in some ways I miss those days. Everyone is so much busier, including media, they're bombarded. So you don't see them as often as you used to. And I miss that face-to-face contact where you're sitting down and you're talking about music. And, I love it. So I loved those conversations. I loved taking a record, into a media outlet and, seeing either having the track added to radio or seeing an album review was and still is for me incredibly satisfying, because I feel like I'm actually helping.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to describe in words unless you were there in many different ways, including, I think, in my opinion, lead ups to things like the big day out and buying tickets for the big day out. It just doesn't feel the same anymore.
No, and kids would line up overnight out the front of, Ticketek or whatever it was. Ahead of a ticket, a show going on sale, and you'd see TV, it would be on the news, and there'd be kids sleeping out overnight to get that physical ticket. And there's some really lovely memories there, and there's some really great things about that. And like I said, having a new, like a box of stock arrive and pulling out the new record and then, taking out the sleeve and looking at the lyrics or the art or whatever it might be. I used to love that.
Now, you made quite a significant move. Once you reached your first goal, which was to start working in the music business, you decided to move to the UK.
I did. Again, everyone thought I was absolutely bonkers. I had a great job in Brisbane as a promotions manager. I loved it. EMI and Virgin were a fantastic company to work for. And, I had a great package. I had a company car and I had an expense card to take media out with, and I had a very good salary. So everyone thought I was mental when I made that decision. And I didn't go over there having a job. But the one thing I wanted to work in a much bigger industry, in a bigger market, I should say, at a much higher level. And that meant moving to an international territory. At that point in time, I think Australia probably represented, from memory, maybe less than 7% of worldwide record sales.
Okay.
So that's, whilst it's significant, working, in a much bigger territory, where you're dealing directly with international superstars, that's the kind of experience I wanted. I wanted to have a go at that. So yes, packed my bags and put myself on a plane, sold everything and went to London. And I think I had about $1,000 in my bank account when I arrived. So I had to work pretty quickly. That was about £300 when I arrived.
Oh, that's not a lot of money in London.
Nope.
No.
I realised that very quickly.
So how did the Island Records job come about? I mean, that's a pretty, it's a well-known label. People would be climbing over each other to get a gig like that. How did that come to be?
There's actually a big agency in London. To get a job in a label in London at that point in time, generally you started as a contractor. So there's a company in London called Handel Recruitment, and they're still there and they still do the same thing. But you sign up with Handel straight away and you start taking temp work. And it might be, I also did from memory about 6 months with Warner in their regional radio department. I had a couple of other little contracts, and then I got a contract, and it was sort of ongoing. You kind of take it not knowing, whether they'll keep you on and roll it into a full-time job or whether they'll, look for somebody else. So it was marketing coordinator. When I first did my temping work in London, I looked at the setup of labels, which is quite different over there. And whilst my background had been in promotions, looking at the setups internally over there, I realized that I wanted to get into marketing because that would be the thing that would teach me a different skill set. And the marketing managers and project managers over there, they oversee the entire thing. And that's the experience I wanted to. So when the marketing coordinator temp role came up at Island, I absolutely jumped at it. And again, it's about throwing yourself into it and working as hard as you can and absorbing as much as you can. As quickly as possible. It was very intimidating, the environment. I felt very much out of my depth. I realized, very quickly when I started to go for job interviews in London that I was ill-equipped and unprepared. It's a much higher level. I went to a job interview and it was an open interview. So whilst I was shortlisted with 20 other people. Mm-hmm. And I realized in that interview, I was humiliated when I walked out because I'd done no research on who the media were, what the market was like. And I learned a very big lesson from that. I'll never forget that interview. I was mortified. I was so unprepared, but it's never, ever happened again. And it is, I found the environment intimidating, and it took a while, I think, for me to get my professional confidence up in that job. It was all so new and so much to absorb, and names and, internal structures and people and artists. And, I was exhausted, I reckon, for the first 6 months, every day after work.
It's a challenge. One, the move is a challenge enough. Two, going into the music business is another one. Putting those two together, that's pretty impressive jump to make. And you came out the other end alive, and you came out the other end more experienced. And let's talk a little bit more about exactly what it was like working in the UK in the music business at the time. We'll take a quick break. We'll come straight back, and we'll have a chat about that.
For more, head to BenPitchersIndustryInsider.com. Follow Ben on YouTube at Ben Pitchers Industry Insider.
Back after the break, joining me, Vic, here from Alpha Entertainment on Ben Pitchers Industry Insider. Vic, you were talking about getting your professional confidence up and the big move to the UK and landing freelance gigs, and then eventually ending up with Island Records. What I'd be interested to know is, can you give us a bit of an idea of what the musical and cultural landscape was like at the time when you were working there?
Yeah, it was probably very, very different to what I expected. I think there were certain eras in British music history that really influenced me. So, everything that was coming out of Manchester and Bristol, and that's sort of, Pulp, Blur, Massive Attack, that kind of era was a driving force into why I wanted to go and work there.
Yeah.
And when I got to the UK and started working over there, it was a very shifting landscape musically.
So, sorry to interrupt, but what years are we talking about there, just to give people a bit of an idea?
We're talking 1999 to about 2003, I think it was.
Right.
So we had, one of the biggest hits for the company when I was there was the Shaggy record, It Wasn't Me. Now, that record, do you remember that record?
I do remember that record, yeah.
Okay, so that song presented Island as, the best company for that year. It was the biggest, I think, year that company had maybe even in the history. So, and the other thing was, it was real, and it was great in some ways. There was a lot of urban hip hop and R&B coming through, and that was not a genre I knew anything about. Or, in my sort of late teens into early 20s, I wasn't influenced by it. We really didn't have a lot of that coming through to Australia. It was really starting to flow through. It was, as well as artists like the Sugar Babes. There was Mary J. Blige, there was PJ Harvey, there was U2. I got to work a lot of eclectic stuff, but I learned, the biggest learning curve for me was about that genre and style of music. It was, and that was a great thing. When I got back to Australia, there was a while there, and I don't know if this is still a relevant fact, but that was the biggest selling genre of music in the world at that point in time. And that wasn't impacting Australia at all. Nothing like that. What was being, played out in Australia was very, very different. So that was a great experience to have. There's a lot more sort of, there's a lot more club music that I was, kind of working and introduced to. The UK quite often has that one big summer record. And there was also some great pop bands that came through. I was there in the very early stages of Busted, and they went on to be quite a big UK band, actually, from memory, pop band. And from, I was digging around the other day. I'm pretty sure somewhere, or I'm pretty confident that towards the end of my time at Island, which would have been 2002, 2003, it must have been, they were just starting to talk to Amy Winehouse. Right. And I think she was just presenting demos for them at that stage. I should probably fact check that, but I'm pretty sure that that's true. I do vaguely remember her name coming through the door when I was there. That's a long time ago. So it was a very different environment that I walked into, and it wasn't one that I expected either. But that's what made the experience so incredible. And I had, as I said before, I had to work really, really hard to get my head around everything and to shift and adjust. And I think that I came back with a really, really strong English accent. I didn't realize I'd picked it up so quickly. But I do believe that there's probably, on my behalf, a subconscious kind of level, a subconscious level of thinking where I wanted to assimilate myself quite quickly into that environment. I got a lot of comments about just being another dossing Antipodean. It was very, very difficult to be taken seriously. I think they always believed that you're, just another Australian, in London, and you're not there to stay. So they're kind of some of the roadblocks that you hit. And there are small things that, like the accent and stuff, I probably wanted to kill off the Australian accent as quickly as I could to be taken more seriously. It wasn't a conscious thing at all, don't get me wrong, but in hindsight, I think that probably went on. It was great, amazing experience. It wasn't until I got back that I realized how much I had learned and how much I had grown.
Subscribe to Ben Pitcher's Industry Insider through iTunes. Follow Ben on Instagram at Industry Insider Official.
Now the move, was it just, and I know with a lot of Aussies, because, well, we're Queenslanders for a start, so there's sun all year round, but how much does the weather affect your mentality?
Hugely, and they don't put that in the brochure.
Yeah. There's a brochure?
Yeah, there wasn't a brochure. Like when I moved to London, I quite like the cold weather. I was expecting the cold. I was hoping for snow. I'd never seen snow, and that didn't bother me. But what they don't put in the brochure is the greyness. However, on the flip side of that, London in the summer for that 8 weeks is amazing. It is a different city completely. And it's so good that that's probably what kept me there for so long. Within the first year, by the time I hit the second year, I used to take St John's Wort from January through to March. You come out the other side of Christmas and you don't see daylight. It's dark in the morning when you get up, and the sky is grey during the day, and then it's pitch black again at 4 o'clock at night. And that had a huge impact on my psyche, to be honest with you. And so there's a natural supplement, a natural sort of antidepressant called St John's Wort. And I would find that sort of January, February, March, I would be pumping that into myself.
Right. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, so was it a bit of both? Was it the weather, lifestyle, and just... I don't know. Why did you end up heading back to Australia?
My job at Island Records was made redundant.
Okay.
And I kind of skirted around for a little bit, and we were heading into winter, and my parents actually came over for a trip to see me, and I didn't have a new job, and I was doing a couple of contracts. Actually, that's a lie. I took a job with Warner in marketing, and I was there for a month. And they had a restructure internally, which meant that they were bringing another head of marketing in, and he was bringing his team with me. And so my marketing director at the time said, God, we have to let you go. We can't keep you on because he's bringing his own team. And they were very disappointed, and I was very disappointed. My parents were in the UK at the time, and they said, why don't you come home? Just come home for the winter, you know, and go back over when the weather is a bit better. And I thought, you know what, that's a great idea. That would do me the world of good. And so I had every intention of going back, to be honest with you. And then it was this sort of really, really strange coincidence and strange kind of sequence of events that I ended up with this amazing job offer in Australia, and I decided to not go back and stay. So, yeah.
Now, the job offer is interesting. This is a music DVD catalog company. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. That was
Sorry, go on.
Sorry,
I just find that very interesting. Can you relate to that a little bit more?
This must have been in sort of 2004, 2005, I think.
Yeah.
And music DVDs were doing big business. They were big business at the time. I think they were selling massive quantities, and all of those live concerts. I'm trying to think back. It might have been an Eagles concert, but they were doing big numbers. And so the company, they had a really booming sort of children's DVD division, and they had various other divisions, and they wanted a music division. And that job came about literally. I was sitting online one day, and I must have been looking at seek.com, to be honest, just kind of, seeing what was out there. And this job popped up, and the job title and the job description were very, very different. And it's like, what the description was a marketing kind of PR or a marketing manager's role, really. But the job title was they were looking for a music A&R person. And so I phoned, not being a smart ass at all, but I phoned the recruitment company that had the ad up and went, look, I'm not sure if you realise, but the job title that you've got, that's not what that person does. That job title should be this, or the job description should be different. Anyway, and I wasn't being a smart ass. And then they went, oh, wow, okay, well, thank you. And I went, that's okay, I just thought you should know, hung up. And then they called me back and they said, do you want to actually have an interview? And I went, oh, and it just changed my thinking completely. And so I went and did the interview, and still at that point I thought, it's good to keep your interview skills up. And I was doing it more to keep my skill set up in an interview process. And the offer came through. And the more I thought about it and the more I looked at it, and it's like, this was a great opportunity. It was going to broaden my skill set out enormously. There was some incredible travel opportunities with the job. I would get to oversee an entire division. I would be across marketing, press, promotion, sales. And I would get to go to those international buying markets. So we went to Midam, we did a round the world trip. We met a lot of different people. And I learned to do profit and loss statements. And it really kind of built on some of the marketing stuff that I had learned in the UK, but also gave me that DVD experience as well. And it was great. They were a great company to work for. So I ended up staying.
Wow, that's a nice way to get a job, but
I know, isn't it bizarre?
It seems to be the way with like I keep saying, this entertainment business, be it in physical sales or be it as a radio announcer, a presenter, or PR, they just seem to come in the strangest ways. They're never straightforward.
They're not. None of really, most of the jobs I've got haven't always been sort of, in this industry, in the most traditional kind of, job finding methods.
Yeah.
Quite often it has been about knowing somebody.
Yeah.
You've still got to perform in an interview situation and you've got to be able to do the job. But the way the jobs have come for me have always been, through kind of quite unusual avenues.
They are unusual indeed. And stick around with us. It's the end of the first half hour. In the next half hour, we're going to talk about Vix moving back to Australia and starting Alpha Entertainment.
You've been listening to Ben Pitcher's Industry Insider.